Hello and welcome to Hidden Realms. Today, we look at the Lord of Original Obscurity, Melkor. Melkor, also known to the queens of Morgoth and others, is one of the seven lords. Manwë, the king of the sea, All, the smith, Orm, the great, Mandos, judge of the dead, and Tulkas, the champion. Then we have the seven queens, Varda, the lady of light, Este, the lady of mercy, and others. These 14 followed the paths of Eru and were great supporters of him. But as in most stories, there were others on which we can focus today. From his creations, we see only a glimpse of his thoughts and ideas. Each of the Valar represents different aspects and thoughts in various fields. But unlike the others, Melkor was created with a greater level of power and knowledge. For example, Tulkas had the ability to physically submerge himself to escape, adapting to this additional knowledge. Melkor, however, pursued a slightly different path because he was aware of the life-giving essence that Tolkien described. He gave life to things and bestowed upon them souls. This is reflected in Gandalf's speech on the bridge of Khazad-dûm when he fought against the Balrog, saying, "I am a servant of the secret fire," which is a different name for the flame of creation. What he truly desired was to create and obtain the power to bring forth life. The event called Ainur, or the music of the Ainur, reveals that each of them would teach music and song, and together they sang for Eru, who created the vision of Ilúvatar. This vision ultimately shaped the world in harmony, but Melkor's song was so powerful that some of the Ainur were confused about which song they should sing. He attempted to dominate the new creation, swinging the music in his direction. In the end, Eru sang the last powerful note to conclude the music that Melkor had disrupted. He tells her that he created everything, and from this creation came Eru's essence, which made everything that exists. This term, Ainur, refers to the universe and the void that encompasses it, as well as the timeless planes outside of it. With this, something that meant that Melkor was now in the world was established. Melkor sought to help and support the creation of Eru, but he desired a world for himself to control, a world of slaves under his dominion. Yet, Melkor was authorized to operate within Eru's design. Melkor was always alone, despite having many followers. Some openly supported him, while others secretly backed him to serve a different agenda. Treating this world as the most powerful among them, Manwë did not fully understand the concept of evil and corruption, but he knew that he and the other Valar had to prevent Melkor from corrupting Aya as a beautiful and peaceful place. Thus began the War of the Valar. Doing things his way, Melkor sought to impose his vision on the other Valar. It took a while for the last Valar to take control of their physical forms, with Tulkas being the most ready for war. The other Valar showed interest in this, but in the ongoing conflict, Tulkas entered this level of existence. Although Melkor was more experienced and powerful, he was also more prudent in most cases, leading to failures. The rest of the Valar could now fulfill their wish to establish the world of Arda, which formed a symmetrical land called Aman. On this land, the Valar created two great lamps to finally bring light into the world. Melkor always fluctuated in shaping his next move, waiting for the right moment. He would not have to wait long, as the Valar held a festival of celebrations at the end of their task. During this time, Melkor drank, lacking the foresight to see the great threat looming. He moved to the north, where he built his all-powerful fortress, Utumno. For those who did not know, the walls of the night were the outer barriers of the world, surrounding Arda with external darkness. Meanwhile, Tulkas was asleep, allowing evil to rise. The Valar had to remember that Melkor had truly returned, and this was something they should never forget. So for cold weather to appear as something purely of Malcolm's corruption, the Valar knew that they need to find him and stop him before his evil could spread too far. However, before they could do anything, Malcolm strikes first. The Valar are taken by surprise by this, and Malcolm comes out on top. He destroys the two lamps, bringing complete darkness back to the world and claiming victory over the other Valar. It is said during his attack that it was so great that not only were the lamps destroyed, but also the land of Eamran along with them, and again along with that the entire symmetry of the planet got broken too. You may be wondering, though, surely couldn't all the Valar together have overcome and attacked Malcolm? And well, it's not quite as simple as that. Melkor had used such a great amount of his power to destroy everything that the Valar needed to use their powers to prevent the entire world from collapse, which left them really unable to have any remaining fight left in them to fight back against him, so unable to pursue Malcolm, but having stopped the end of their world and let it fall into ruin, the Valar now needed to find somewhere new to reside, And so this is where they chose a man across the sea building Valinor upon its land. Now living in their new home of Valinor, the Vala need to establish a new form of light for the world. However, they do not build 2 lamps as they did before. Instead, this time they go for a different structure. This time they build 2 trees. Instead, one of gold and one of silver, and they are named Topirian and Laurelin. This angers Mocker, as it now meant he must defeat them all over again. However, Malcolm was still not ready to launch an attack on the Vala once more, and with Tolkas this time awake, he was wary that they would rise up against him with their combined might. So instead, in these next years, Malcolm would build another fortress, with this one called Angerband, and this was located beneath Room in the Iron Mountains in the north of Middle-earth. Here Malcolm would place a certain commander and his greatest servant that many of you may recognize, and he was called Sauron. So Malcolm had now managed to build up an almighty army that consisted of evil creatures, including the likes of Balrogs, along with near unbreachable strongholds. This would not stop the Vala though, and they would launch an attack on Melkor, and this would fail, and the Vala would get pushed back to Valinor. Malcolm would not sit idle in his victory, though, and he would continue to delve deeper into the earth and build more to his great fortresses. He would also come to learn of the awakening of the elves. At this time too, Malcolm made it his mission to find them, which he did before any of the other Vala managed to themselves. He killed and captured so many of them, with this being the event that it is believed that caused the creation of the first orcs, which came as a result of the unimaginable twisting, torture, and then breeding forced upon them. It would not take too long before the Vala found the elves themselves, though, as they feared that Malcolm would capture, warp, and corrupt all of them. And so they came back at Malcolm with furious anger, and this led to an event called the Battle of the Powers, also known as the War of the Gods. The Vala knew that this was the time to stop Malcolm and his corruption over Middle-earth before it became too late to stop them, and so with their combined power and determination they marched straight to Malcolm and his forces. The Vala would leash the power that would destroy Utamo and lead to the capture of Malcolm himself. He was taken unchained by Ongino and sentenced to be imprisoned in the halls of Mandos indefinitely. However, the Vala did make a mistake here, for they did not push on to round up and wipe out all of the evil that Malcolm had corrupted. Instead, they needed to recover. This meant that many of the evil creatures just went into hiding until their leader returned, and this even included Sauron. And so for 3 ages Malcolm remained in chains, and this was said to be around 900 years of equivalent time. After these many, many years, Malcolm came to beg to Manwë for pardon. Although the thoughts of revenge were ever present in him, he pushed it aside to beg from his brother. Somehow Malcolm was trusted here, at least to a certain degree, as Manwë granted Malcolm what he asked. This was not a decision agreed with by all, though, for the likes of Tolkas and Omo were very skeptical of this call. This meant that despite the chains being removed, the Vala would not permit Malcolm to leave their sight. However, this does not stop Malcolm from making contact with the elves that lived here, as he already had a plan up his sleeve. This did not mean that the owls were all willing to listen to the words that came out of his mouth, though the group of the owls known as the Vanir did not even humor him, as they did not possess an ounce of trust in this spirit. The Talari were at the other end of the spectrum, in that Malcolm did not wish to waste his time with them, believing them to be too weak for his grand plans. However, the Noldor would just like that third bowl of porridge just right. They had a greater wish for knowledge and skills, which meant their wishes were closer to that of Malcolm's, and so Malcolm approached the one amongst them closest to himself, Feanor. Another powerful reason for Malcolm to approach Feanor is that at this time he was also creating the Selmarels, and Malcolm desired these more greatly than anything else. Malcolm would begin to weave his poisonous words into Feanor's mind, spreading rumors of the coming of men, raising doubts about the true wishes of the Valar, trying to turn them to his side. However, Malcolm could not keep his meddling quiet enough, as Feanor began to realize that his lust was there for the Silmarils, and he rejected Malcolm. And so his words ended up reaching the ears of Tolkas, who decides at once that Malcolm needs to be returned to his chains. He cannot be trusted, he cannot be left to roam free. Mocker had seen this come in, and he fled south before he could be confronted. Malcolm traveled to a land known as Avathar, southeast of Valinor, where he came across a dark creature who had once been allied to him, the spider-like spirit known as Ungoliant, even though Ungoliant had previously rejected Mocker as his leader after he had been defeated. Melkor managed to convince Ungoliant to serve him once again with the offer of riches. In return, Malcolm wishes for both the Silmarils and to destroy what the Vala love, and so he uses Ungoliant for her ability to weave a cloak of shadow to hide them from the sight of the Vala. By this method, they manage to reach the 2 trees, and Malcolm pierces them, draining them of their essence with Ungoliant, then drinking this sap to power Herself once again, this leaves the world in darkness in the confusion and the chaos that this creates. The two then travel north to Forminos, where Malcolm steals the great jewels that are kept there, including the Silmarils. But not just this, Malcolm also slays the first king of the Noddle Finwë, as well as the darkness still reigns over everything. Melkor and Ungoliant flee into Middle-earth by way of the icy passage, known by the name of How. Correct, and by this route reach Maoko's stronghold of Angapat. This is where a betrayal occurs, for Ungoliant wished to devour every single jewel to destroy all that they had taken, and although Malcolm initially allows her to do this, he will not allow her to take the Selma rails. As well, Malcolm would struggle to defend himself, although Ungoliant was no Valar, all the evil acts that he had committed had taken great strength and energy from him, which had left him in a much weakened state. Whereas Ungoliant, she had been revitalized and swelled with power after drinking the sap of the trees, so she had become too much for even the greatest of the Vala. In his current state, Ungoliant managed to trap Malcolm in her webs and began to torture him up until the very close point of devouring him as well. However, Malcolm screamed such terrible screams that it awoke the Balrogs that slept deep beneath Angband. These Balrogs, led by Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs, came to Malcolm's rescue just in time and managed to drive Ungoliant away with their whips of fire. With Malcolm now free of her wept and Ungoliant, having ran far away, Malcolm returns into Angband, and he would go on to create a great iron crown for himself that would house the 3 Silmarils that he had so greatly desired. Also, as an important point here, if we take a quick step backwards, when Malcolm had stolen the great jewels, informing us, and killed Fenway Feanor, had cursed Malcolm, naming him now Morgoth, which is the name that he was only called by from that point onwards by any of the Alda, as they believed his Vala name of Malcolm was no longer worthy of him, so their created name of Morgoth was more suited. And so that is now how I shall refer to him for the remainder of his story. Morgoth has now settled back in Middle-earth to the north of Beleriand, in his rebuilt fortress of Angband, and he comes to learn that the lands in the rest of Valerian have come to be settled by the Owls during his time in chains. This irks Malcolm. He cannot accept that the Owls are free. He believes that they should be under his control, that they should be his slaves, so of course he cannot just let them live here without interference. This is where the Wars of Beleriand would come to be, and I will say here I do have a more complete video on the battles of the Wars of Beleriand, if you would like to check that out in greater detail. But I will run over Morgoth's involvement in this war in broader strokes here. So Morgoth's first plan in what becomes the first battle of the war is to send out his armies of orcs and cut off the Owls of Elithingol, and the Sinda and Doriath from Círdan, and the Talari and the Phallus, which he succeeds in doing. However, out from the opposite side, Thingol manages to send a request of help to Denethor, and the Nander and Austrian, who comes to his aid with an army of his green elves. These reinforcements make it too much for the orcs of Morgoth, so they retreat, but they are then utterly defeated in their retreat by the dwarves that appear from the Blue Mountains. After they tried to return to Angband, despite that loss for Morgoth, he was finding more joy from his orc that was still attacking Círdan, though keeping him trapped. Next we get to the second battle of Dager Nuin Gileath, or Battle Under Stars, and the return of Feanor. In Morgoth's life, Feanor had brought a force of elves from a man who were a far greater foe than those elves who had stayed in Middle-earth, and they marched all the way to Thangaradrim, with the orcs unable to match these elves. When Feanor pushed on to the gates of Angband, he was separated from the main force by Morgoth's orcs. This is where Morgoth knew the time was right to send out his Balrogs, led by Gothmog. Although Feanor put up a fight, and I mean a good fight too, he suffered too many wounds and was struck down by Gothmog. So although the war was not really going his way at this point, the achievement of killing Feanor was a softening factor to that. Then we have the Dager Aglarep, or Glorious Battle. This third battle of the war involved the coming of Fingolfin to the war. Like the second battle had with Feanor, he had also come over the icy passage Halcrax with a certain Galadriel alongside him, as opposed to taking the ships like Feanor did. But the full reason for that being important is also one for another video, but let's just say it involves a kinslayer. So now more Noldor have arrived, and Fingolfin has teamed up with Mithros, where they march in a great victory all the way up to the gates of Angband, trapping Malcolm in sight. This is where the siege of Angband begins by the elves. Despite their strength, the defense of Morgoth was far stronger. Morgoth was then stuck here for a great time, but he does not sit idly by a moat. No, he uses the extreme size of his underground realm to rebuild and improve. They are at a stalemate, But that is until Morgoth regains his strength and finally in time sets forth his dragons, which is what now leads on to battle number for the Dager Ragalak, or Battle of Sudden Flame. Morgoth sent forth the population of Angband, led by Glorung the dragon and Gothmog, lord of Balrogs. He also sent forth great rivers of fire onto the fields for his forces of dragons, Balrogs, orcs, and other evil creatures, to take the fight to the elves this well, and truly broke the siege of Angband. The strength and timing of this attack meant that the elves stood no chance. Morgoth not only broke the siege, but also now too controlled a great amount of the north of Beleriand with it. However, something happens next that Morgoth does not predict. The Alpha Fingolfin, the High King of the Nodule, rides to the gates of Angband alone to challenge the great Valar Morgoth in single combat, even if there was amount of fear of death within Morgoth. He would also never truly believe a small child of Ilúvatar could have a best him of Vala, so he meets Fingolfin, and this jewel was one of legend. And on a personal note here, one I would love to see a live action or animated version of at some point. So give me a like on this video if you agree with that. But anyway, Fingolfin managed to deal 7 separate wounds to Morgoth as he was powered by anger at what Morgoth had done to his kin. However, Morgoth was still too much for him. After all, he is one of the Valar. Morgoth managed to knock him to the ground on 3 separate occasions, but Fingolfin would rise from each of these knockdowns. Nonetheless, eventually it would become too much for him, and Morgoth would bring him down by the use of Grond, his hammer weapon, and shield. With Morgoth about to crush Fingolfin under his foot, Fingolfin got one final stab into Morgoth's foot, which is said to have left him with a limp for the rest of his time, just before Morgoth could deliver the final life-ending blow, snapping Fingolfin's neck. He is saved by the intervention of the Rondor, the greatest of the eagles of Manwë, who struck Morgoth's face and carried the body of Fingolfin away. There would be 16 years before the 5th battle in the war. But this was not 16 years of nothing. One of the legendary stories of Middle-earth took place during these years, and that was the quest of Beren and Luthien, who had Beren of Bale's house in Doriath and Luthien to Nuviel, who was the daughter of Eluthingal and Melian the Maya they would wish for this Silmaril, as that was the only way Thingel would believe Beren was worthy of his daughter's hand in marriage. So together they disguise themselves and enter into Angband. However, the disguise is not great enough to hide them from Morgoth, who is aware of their presence, but allows them to appear before him, curious as to what their plan may be. As Morgoth planned just what to do with Luthien. As she stood before him, he let her dance for him, and she managed to send him to sleep through the power of her son. Very much something Morgoth did not predict. Beren then cut one of the Silmarils from Morgoth's crown as he lay there unconscious. However, the knife would break and stir milk off, as the two then realized they must escape quick, which they managed to do, and this left Morgoth with just the remaining 2 Silmarils. Now a few more years on Morgoth would reach the 5th battle of the Wars of Beleriand, the Nyniath Anodiate, or the Battle of a Numbered Tears. There are now men within Beleriand as well, and they choose now to try and team up to once and for all push more gods, evil out of their lands. However, Morgoth is no fool and is aware of their up-and-coming plan, and he too has brought men to his side, the ones known as Easterlings, which is basically just any of the men who lived to the east of the Blue Mountains during this time, which means for Morgoth's side this gives them a great surprise attack from the site. Morgoth comes out the great winner of this battle of chaos and death, and any survivors on the side of good must flee to their remaining safe places, like that of the hidden city of Gondolin. And one man to mention from this battle, though, is that of Harrowen, of who the stories of the children of Harrowen are written after, for he is captured and taken alive back to Morgoth, who places him high upon Thangorodrim and curses him to watch his family, including of course his son Turin, who are also cursed, and Harrowen isn't able to do anything to help them and can only be forced to watch. There is also an elf to mention here too, a traitor elf called Micklin. Thanks to the betrayal of Micklin, Morgoth was able to discover the location of Gondolin, and so he laid siege to it with Morgoth's forces, being able to bring down this one last defense of the elves. This was not a flawless victory, though, for Morgoth lost one of his mightiest servants of Gothmog, lord of Balrogs, by the hand of Acthelion during this battle, and along with this too another small group led by Glorfindel managed to escape, which would be so important in time, as it included a certain 7-year-old child named Arendel, son of Idril, daughter of Kintergon of Gondolin, who had fallen with Gondolin, and 2 all of the house of Huddle and brother of Harrowen, as we previously mentioned a minute ago. But we will get back to why in a moment. Morgoth now feels confident, for despite losing Gothmog and one of the Silmarils, he now controls basically all of Valerian, and still has the likes of Sauron at his side too. He is not exactly in a powerless state, however, that small child Arendel some years later Believed to be when he was around 20 to 30 years old, when on an unheard-of quest, he built a ship with the help of Círdan the shipwright, and he would name it Vingelat. And he would take this ship and set sail for the land of Aman. Now, for those of you who wonder what is so unheard of about this, it is that no man had ever set foot on this land. This land was for the divine spirits, and the first children of Ilúvatar, no one else. However, with Eärendil being half-elf, this is likely what made it at least a little bit acceptable for him to take this path, as well as him also having his path guided by the light of the Silmaril that Beren had previously cut for Morgoth's crown, and along with this too, as he had taken this quest on behalf of both elves and men as a representative, and not just on a selfish quest just for himself like others would attempt to do in the future. So Eärendil would appear in front of the Vala and begged them for their help. He says that without the Morgoth would win, and everything would come under his control willingly or as slaves. And so the Vala answer, they bring forth the host of the Vala, and that would include the likes of Raya Vanya and Noldor still in Valinor, and these would ride for Middle-earth. However, the Teleri would not join due to their feelings from the first Kingslane that I very briefly mentioned upon earlier, as they still felt too strong feelings against the Naldal for their actions. It is believed that some of the Vala themselves may have come too, but there are never any clear indications whether that is true or not. But you think if you're going to challenge Morgoth, you're going to need a few Vala on your side. This is where the final battle of the Wars of Beleriand takes place, the War of Wrath, or the Great Battle. The numbers that took part were too vast to count, and when the smoke settled at the end of it, all the hosts of the West came out on top. Eärendil had killed the Great Dragon and Calagon the Black with the help of the Great Eagles. Nearly all the Balrogs were destroyed, and those that did survive hid themselves away far and deep, and the orcs stood no match themselves, so were basically all wiped out to the point that all Morgoth had left was Angband itself. However, with his power weakened too, and no defense left in front of him, this meant that the hosts made their way into the dungeons of Angband, where Morgoth had hid himself, and they captured him. Morgoth knew he did not possess the strength to win this fight alone, so he attempted to negotiate for peace. But this time he was not human in any way. They hew his feet from his body, they cut the Sel Moralis from his crown, and once again that chain of Ungino was to hold him as prisoner. This war had left Valerian completely ruined, and mostly sunk. Afterwards the elves split themselves up either over Middle-earth to the east or back into Valinor. The men were given an island called Andor, later to be named Numenor, for their part in the fight against Morgoth, and the other men who fought with Morgoth ran as far east as they could. And then you also have the dwarves of the now ruined No God and Belagos, who also had to find new homes too. Then, as for Morgoth himself, whale-bound in his old chain, he was sent through the door of night beyond the walls of the world, and into the timeless void here. In this everlasting and ancient darkness, Morgoth would be left to simply exist, but not to be able to fully influence anything, and this is where the known story of Morgoth comes to its end. However, it is thought that this may not be the end of him entirely. He was not killed, so somehow, someway, there was a possibility that he could return. It is believed in prophecy that there would one day be one last battle, best known as the Dager Dagarath, or the Battle of All Battles, which had been prophesied by Mandos. It is said that this event would bring the true end to Morgoth at the end of it all. It is worth noting that Christopher Tolkien claimed that from his notes J.R.R. Tolkien had abandoned the idea of the Dagarath as a prophecy of Mandos, but it is still one many people know of. Regardless, it is said that Morgoth would be slain by Turin Turamba, the son of Heroin, that Morgoth had cursed all that time before, but only after Morgoth had still managed to destroy nearly everything that existed, bringing the end to the world. That is when it is believed that a second music of the Ainur would take place, this time without Malcolm, and it would bring forth a new world free of evil and corruption. But really, who knows how that would really end up? Evil seems to always manage to rear his head one way or another, probably just through some other form, or it becomes the idea of paradise, and in that new world they just manage to live happily ever after. So there we have it. A look at the full story of the Dark Lord Melkor, later known as Morgoth. He is the one who is well considered as the big bad main enemy in all of Tolkien's works. After all, he is like the Lucifer of that world. He's a very interesting idea for a character too, as Eru claims that he knew Malcolm's early thoughts. However, he did not intervene and stop him. Eru let Malcolm go about his ways, corrupt all those things that he did and did nothing about it. Very strange when you think that he was directly Going against Eru's wishes, this could well hint, though, that even though Malcolm always wanted to show his power rule over everything, bend everything to his will, he could never in a million years come close to Eru at all. Perhaps it comes back to that idea that no matter what evil will appear, so if Aaron knows about it, that's a safer thing than it's somehow appearing from elsewhere you don't really know. But there is one thing I do find quite sad about the story of Malcolm, though, and that is that we just don't get more detail of it. There are several instances where many years pass on by with nothing of note happening. There could be so much more from Tolkien's mind that sadly he never managed to put onto paper, or it could just be that actually as one of these divine spirits, time just means so little to him. So those long breaks of what appear as nothing happening is just perfectly normal to that kind of entity. It could be either way, but when you have an enemy like Malcolm, you just want to hear more stories about it. But now that we have reached nearly the end of the video, I actually want to end all of this with a quote from the Children of Her and story where Morgoth is talking to her as I feel this sums him up as a character quite nicely about how he felt towards the children of Ilúvatar and the world with her in this quote. Yet so it might be if they willed, for the elder king shall not be dethroned while ardor endures. You say it, said Morgoth, I am the elder king Mocker, first and mightiest of all the Valar, who was before the world, and made it the shadow of my purpose lies upon ardor, and all that is in it bends slowly and surely to my will, but upon all whom you love my thoughts shall we as a cloud of doom, and it shall bring them down into darkness and despair. Wherever they go evil shall arise, whenever they speak their word shall bring ill counsel, whatsoever they do shall turn against them, they shall die, without hope cursing of life and death. So on that very happy note, I hope you all enjoyed this video for today, but this now leads me on to my question for you all. And that is, do you prefer Malcolm or Sauron as a big evil of Tolkien's works? Do you think Malcolm, being the original, makes him the best? Or do you think that his disciple Sauron is in fact a better and more interesting evil instead? Please let me know all of your thoughts and opinions on this in the comment section below. And now, firstly, quickly to mention all of our other channels, including the new Bat Cave channel. If you like your Batman content, please check those out, as links will be in the description below. And also to shout out our patrons, firstly our divine power to your members of Kevin, Abraham, and Matt, you are all awesome. And a big thanks to our Fire Demon tier members of Nash, Denver, Steele, and Gregory. And as well, I cannot forget the Wizard staff to your members of John, Andrew, and Finrod Felligan as well. You are all true legends of the Bro Harem. Finally, if you've managed to reach the very end of this video with me today, I really hope that you have enjoyed it, and I hope you will hit that like button, leave a comment, and hit that subscribe button too if you have not already, along with hitting that bell icon with it, so that you can be notified of all of our future uploads. So thank you once again if you have managed to reach the very end with me, and I will see you next time.